In August 2024, the Burkina military issued a strict order to civilians living in and around the town of Barcelogo. They were told to grab shovels and dig a massive network of defensive trenches to protect the area from encroaching militant groups. But while they were digging, fighters from a local al-Qaeda affiliate launched a surprise ambush. Between 200 and 600 unarmed civilians were killed in the trenches they were forced to build. This map of the Sahel region shows militant fatalities, and you can see a heavy concentration shifting away from Mali and squarely into Burkina Faso. The country now accounts for half of all militant-linked deaths in the entire region. The situation is accelerating. Under the current military government, terror-related deaths have nearly tripled in just the last 3 years. The Burkina people are caught in a devastating bind. Killed by insurgents, their government's reckless defense strategies force them directly onto the front lines. To understand how the country got here, we have to look back to 2015. Islamist violence began spilling over the northern border from Mali, exploiting regions where the Burkina state had very little presence. Today, two main factions dominate the landscape: JINM, which is linked to al-Qaeda, and the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara. Together, they now control roughly 30 to 40% of Burkina Faso's territory. Their strategy relies heavily on punishing the local population. Militants frequently blockade towns, cutting off all road access to stop food, water, and medical supplies from getting in. In the areas they control, these groups enforce strict Sharia law. If they suspect a village is sympathetic to the national government, they routinely massacre the residents. Direct combat with the national army is only part of their operation. Their most effective weapon against the state is the deliberate isolation and starvation of civilians. The national government has responded with extreme force. Led by Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the military junta operates under a desperate total war mobilization strategy to try and claw back territory. A major part of this strategy involves mass arming civilian militias, known as the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, or VDPs. The state essentially recruits regular citizens to fight the insurgency. But this outsourcing of security has led to massive abuses. State forces and these VDP militias frequently carry out extrajudicial killings, often specifically targeting marginalized ethnic groups like the Fulani community. The military also relies heavily on drone strikes to target insurgents. However, they repeatedly strike crowded civilian areas, drastically increasing the death toll of innocent bystanders. By mandating that civilians arm themselves and fight, the state has effectively turned every rural village into a legitimate military target for the jihadists. It's an accelerating cycle of retaliation. This data visualization demonstrates the scale of the resulting displacement. Over 2.1 million people have been forced to flee their homes. That is roughly 10% of Burkina Faso's entire population. For the internal refugees who managed to escape the violence, this is the physical reality on the ground. Massive, sprawling camps set up in the arid landscape, heavily reliant on outside aid. This visual counter tallies the broader systemic collapse. Over 3,700 schools and 970 health facilities have been completely abandoned or destroyed by the conflict. For the civilians still trapped in blockaded towns, the isolation is near total. They survive on extremely dangerous, high-cost helicopter airdrops just to receive basic sacks of grain. Add it all up, and 4.5 million people in Burkina Faso currently require urgent humanitarian assistance simply to survive. The eradication of any safe zone by both the state and the insurgents has engineered a mass human catastrophe. It is a total collapse that now threatens to destabilize the broader region.
Meet Clara Narratio, curious audio for a noisy world. Start your day with the Daily World Brief. Make sense of markets with financial candy. And follow Brain Candy for strange ideas, history, culture, technology, and the questions that make learning stick. You'll also find classic audiobooks, plus book candy companions that bring great books into sharper focus. Follow Clara Narratio on Spotify, YouTube, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts. Better yet, visit claranarratio.com. claranarratio.com. Curious audio, no fluff.
Burkina Faso historically maintained one of the most dynamic civil societies and independent media landscapes in West Africa. In 2014, citizen movements like Ballet Citoyen, whose members are seen here organizing in their signature shirts, successfully channeled public mobilization to oust a dictator who had held power for decades. That landscape shifted in September 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré, pictured here, seized power in a military coup. Upon taking office, he explicitly promised a temporary transition, stating he would return the country to civilian rule by 2024. The junta directed the state's machinery inward, dismantling the citizen networks that once defined the nation's political life. The promised return to democracy was scrapped. The military altered the legal framework to extend the transition period, meaning no elections will take place until at least July 2029. To ensure absolute control over that timeline, the government targeted the electoral infrastructure itself. In July 2024, they dissolved the Independent National Electoral Commission, transferring its responsibilities directly to the Ministry of Territorial Administration. The regime then issued a decree halting all operations and organizing by political parties. Traoré justified these sweeping bans publicly, claiming that traditional democracy is a Western imposition that is unfit for the nation. Delaying the vote, dismantling the commission, and outlawing political organization has engineered an institutional vacuum with zero legal opposition. With the political opposition cleared, the regime moved to control public information. They targeted major international broadcasters, suspending operations for networks like France 24, whose signage is seen here, along with the BBC and Voice of America. Domestic outlets faced the same treatment. The state suspended prominent independent newspapers like L'Événement and radio stations like Radio Omega for publishing reporting critical of the military. To control the narrative, state-sponsored digital networks rapidly filled the void. These coordinated groups fled the internet with pro-government messaging, labeling critics as non-patriotic. The crackdown soon extended from the press to civil society. The military dissolved dozens of non-governmental organizations and arrested foreign aid workers on fabricated charges of espionage. Taking it a step further, the junta ordered the United Nations Human Rights Office to indefinitely suspend all operations inside the country. Muzzling the press and expelling international watchdogs removes the independent monitors capable of documenting state abuses. The government then neutralized the formal judiciary. In late 2023, they passed legislation to completely abolish the High Court of Justice. They followed up with constitutional amendments that placed individuals with zero judicial experience onto key legal councils, stripping the courts of their independence. Around the same time, the state introduced a sweeping general mobilization law. Ostensibly, this was an emergency measure to grant the executive branch resources to fight the ongoing insurgency. In reality, the regime weaponized this law to bypass the weakened courts. They used the emergency mobilization decree as legal cover to physically abduct high-profile critics from their homes and offices. Serge Ulan, the director of an investigative newspaper, was secretly detained. Instead of a trial, he was forcibly conscripted into the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland and deployed to active combat zones. Guy Harvey Com, a prominent lawyer and co-founder of the Ballet Citoyen movement, faced arbitrary arrest and was held in secret military detention. When local magistrates ruled that these forced conscriptions violated human rights, the military retaliated directly. They abducted the very judges who authored the rulings and forcibly deployed them to the front lines. Forced military conscription now functions as a state-sanctioned disposal method to physically eliminate political dissidents. With domestic resistance largely subdued, the administration is advancing legislation to formally reinstate the death penalty for charges like treason. Simultaneously, the junta introduced revisions to the family code designed to legally criminalize homosexuality, stripping away further fundamental civil liberties. To insulate these actions from external pressure, the regime is severing its regional ties. They initiated a formal withdrawal from ECOWAS, walking away from the regional bloc and its diplomatic leaders, like the commission president shown here. Burkina Faso also coordinated a withdrawal from the International Criminal Court, dismantling the legal mechanisms required to investigate allegations of war crimes. Captain Traoré's government has engineered a closed system. By dismantling the courts, conscripting the press, and ejecting international watchdogs, the state has built an environment where the law is a weapon and all avenues for accountability are erased. To understand the economic survival of Burkina Faso, you have to look into the ground. Gold accounts for over 70% of the nation's export earnings. It is the primary engine of their entire economy. For decades, this immense wealth was extracted primarily by Western corporate entities. Under the traditional concession model, foreign multinationals controlled the operations, while the Burkina state collected a minimal, passive stream of royalties. Following his seizure of power in 2022, Captain Ibrahim Traoré prioritized absolute resource sovereignty. His administration immediately targeted the mining sector to rewrite the rules of ownership. The objective is the total dismantling of the foreign-dominated concession model. The administration is replacing passive rent collection with integrated state capitalism, positioning the government as the primary manager and beneficiary of its own natural assets. This map illustrates the physical transition over the last 2 years. Mining assets previously controlled by Canadian, Australian, and British firms are systematically being transferred to the state. This transfer is managed through SOPAMIB, the state-owned mining company. The government deliberately revived this previously dormant entity to serve as the primary operational spearhead for the new economic structure. Burkina Faso is aggressively rewiring its primary revenue engine to finance its own survival. By examining the administration's recent contract renegotiations and the launch of new state-run mines, we can map how this consolidation is taking shape. The legal mechanism driving this strategy is the new mining code, adopted in August 2024. The code tightens the timeline for extraction. It halves the duration of large-scale mining permits, dropping them from a maximum of 20 years down to 10 years. This graphic illustrates the concept of free carried interest, the mandatory cost-free equity stake granted to the government. The new code dictates an increase in the state's automatic equity cut, moving from a 10% baseline up to 15%. The administration applied these terms immediately to existing, highly successful foreign operations. A prime example is the Kiaka mine, operated by West African Resources. The Kiaka project achieved its first gold pour in June 2025. In its first year of operation, the facility produced over 95,000 ounces of gold. But in April 2026, the Burkina government delivered an ultimatum. They demanded that the state's equity in the Kiaka mine be expanded well beyond the agreed 15%, pushing it to 40%. The sudden demand triggered immediate financial fallout. West African Resources was forced to suspend trading of its shares on the Australian Securities Exchange as it navigated the disruption. The ultimatum at Kiaka demonstrates the state's operating procedure. The government will intentionally squeeze highly lucrative foreign operators if it achieves the goal of maximizing direct state capture of resource wealth. Securing a larger equity stake at the extraction site is only the first step. The state is also moving to capture the midstream margins. In February 2024, the administration abruptly halted the export of raw, small-scale artisanal gold. The objective is to force all material through domestic processing channels. Alongside the export halt, the state initiated an aggressive crackdown on illicit trading networks to ensure no raw gold bypasses formal state revenue collection. The National Anti-Gold Fraud Brigade executed this directive directly. In 3 years, they dismantled 25 illegal trading networks and recovered $16.8 million in penalties. This flowchart maps where that retained resource goes next. The administration is constructing the nation's first domestic gold refinery, engineered with an annual processing capacity of 150 tons. With domestic refining established, the strategy loops back to extraction to reach its ultimate structural endpoint, eliminating the foreign intermediary entirely. In July 2026, the government officially launched the Bouboulou Gold Project. Bouboulou breaks completely from the traditional foreign concession model. It operates 100% under the control of the state-owned mining company, SOPAMIB. This balance sheet shows the economics of independence. To launch Bouboulou without foreign capital, the state invested $56.1 million. Over 15 years, the site will yield 7 metric tons of gold. The projected return is $68.4 million, injected directly into public funds. The Bouboulou mine is the realization of integrated state capitalism in Burkina Faso. The government substituted foreign capital dependency with state-backed financing, ensuring that 100% of the net profits remain within national borders. At the operational level, the mechanics of revenue capture, The equity grabs, the domestic refineries, and the anti-smuggling task forces are executing exactly as the Traore administration designed. But zooming out to the administrative center of Ouagadougou, we must weigh these new revenues against the broader national balance sheet. The new gold revenues are immediately consumed by an ongoing internal security crisis against insurgent groups. To fund the military response, defense and security expenditures have surged by 138% over the past 5 years. Under national defense laws, these expenditures remain largely opaque, shielded from standard procurement oversight and public scrutiny. This intense security spending sits atop a fragile economy where 95.2% of the workforce operates in the unregulated, informal sector. This scale visualizes the macroeconomic reality. The state's new gold revenues must counterbalance a 138% increase in security costs, a 95% informal workforce, and an enduring external debt of $5.6 billion. Executing this rapid economic pivot, while isolated from Western capital markets, requires the administration to find alternative geopolitical partners. Russian entities are stepping in to fill the void. Corporations like Nordgold have secured new industrial mining licenses directly from the state. This approach extends beyond Burkina Faso's borders. The Alliance of Sahel states is collectively rewriting the rules of foreign resource extraction across the region. Captain Traore's resource nationalism demonstrates aggressive legal and economic consolidation. However, the crushing macroeconomic realities and the high costs of internal security mean that this shift may simply substitute reliance on the West for a new axis of foreign dependency.